My name is Amy Swearer. I'm a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation's Ed Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies. Here we are, once again, holding a congressional hearing on gun violence. This time, the chosen lens is that of public health. Despite the slightly different title, it's effectively the same hearing as the last several gun hearings to which I've been called to testify. To be completely honest, I don't have much to say that's different from what I've said in my previous testimonies. Believe me, I'm not being flippant. It's just that using a public health lens hasn't changed the discussion. Put aside that the end goal of many of those pushing the public health framing is often either to use crisis language as an end run around the Constitution or to pathologize the right to keep and bear arms. Put aside, too, that the public health lens is not particularly useful for understanding and addressing a problem that stems at its core not so much from a lack of insight into how violence affects health as from a lack of adequately enforcing criminal laws and utilizing existing mental health frameworks. If we take the issue of gun violence seriously from a public health perspective, none of the problems or solutions have changed. A public health framework doesn't change, for instance, the fact that most gun crimes are perpetrated not by ordinary lawful gun owners, but by a small subset of repeat offenders who are already prohibited from owning guns. It's still the case that if our policing, bail, and prosecutorial policies immediately spit these repeat violent offenders back into the community without pursuing criminal prosecution or punishment, they will predictably keep committing violent crimes. A public health lens doesn't change the fact that most gun deaths are suicides, but half of suicides are carried out with something other than a firearm. So pathologizing a specific weapon remains far less useful than talking about all lethal means during a personal crisis and dealing with hard underlying truths about the nationwide mental health crisis. It certainly doesn't change the fact that most of the gun control restrictions commonly proposed to deal with criminal violence and suicide, things like assault weapons bans, magazine capacity restrictions, punitive public carry laws, and so on, are not even remotely designed to meaningfully address any major factors underlying crime or suicide. And a public health lens doesn't fix the constitutional or practical concerns about implementing these policies, nor does it erase the fundamental importance of the right to keep and bear arms to the natural right of self-defense. And so my proposals for how Congress should move forward may sound pretty familiar. Among other things that I've outlined in my 35 pages of written submission, Congress can and should pursue the following. First, Congress can start right here in Washington, D.C., where the D.C. City Council's reform efforts have created a crime tsunami under which the district's residents are currently drowning. Congress should exercise its plenary authority and pass a modern, comprehensive criminal code for the district, including a mandatory sentencing scheme for the Superior Court judges. It should strip the D.C. Office of Attorney General of the authority to prosecute all crimes and give that to the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office. It should federalize the D.C. Crime Lab and give that to the FBI. Second, Congress can and should rein in federal agencies like ATF when they shift their time and attention to overregulating peaceable citizens instead of targeting violent criminals who actually threaten public safety. Third, Congress can compel the military branches to better share with civilian authorities all relevant information about service members who clearly pose a danger to themselves or their communities. Last month's shooting by a mentally ill Army reservist in Lewiston, Maine, was not the first time the military's failure to share such information resulted in preventable tragedy. Congress can ensure that it is the last. Fourth, instead of spending so much time pathologizing and demonizing specific mechanisms of violence, Congress can turn its attention toward promoting economic growth and easing crushing inflation rates. No, that's not nearly as sexy as calling for an assault weapons ban, but reducing economic stress, poverty, and family instability lowers a person's overall risk of suicide far more than requiring his or her rifle to be featureless. Senators, if today is an average day, by the time we finish this hearing in about 3 hours, roughly 8 Americans will have been murdered, about twice as many will have killed themselves, and countless others will have been violently victimized. Much of that violence will involve firearms. This is antithetical to human flourishing, to the rule of law, and to civil society. It's a problem worth understanding accurately and addressing meaningfully. And so I am happy to come back and repeat the same testimony as many times as you ask me to. And I will explain the same potential courses of action as often as it takes for Congress to do not just something, but the right things.